Glen is the Outreach and Visitor Centre Manager at the Canberra Deep Space Communications Complex outside of Canberra in the ACT. And we've been hoping to get Glen to speak to our group for some time now, but we haven't really been able to make that happen. So we're really pleased that he is with us tonight. So Glen has been in that position since around 2002. I'm sure he'll tell us a little bit about that. But we're really interested in hearing about what's happening at the complex, a little bit about the history, and also the future and what's happening with the support for the Artemis program, and you know, what we can look forward to in the future. So Glen, if you're ready to go, we'll I'd love to hand over to you. Thanks very much.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks, Rory. Thanks for inviting me tonight. As is tradition when we do presentations, just want to acknowledge the traditional owners of the lands that I'm on today, which is the Ngunnawal people, and pay my respects to their elders past and present. Yeah, the topic for tonight, it was sort of in some ways given to me, which was sort of from Mariner to Artemis, and it really, how do you encapsulate the last 58 years that we've been operating out at Tibumbilla, and cover it in just a short presentation. So what I plan to do is give a quick little background to who I am, about the station in general, for those people who don't know the tracking station in Canberra. Touch on a couple of points just about that early history, particularly, and how it sort of fits in with the history of our exploration today. I'm going to cover that quite briefly, and then get more into the nuts and bolts of the station and the work we're doing today. So, and I believe after this we've got some time for some Q&A as we go along. Just before I start my slide pack here, so as I've been introduced, my name is Glen Nagle. I am the Education and Visitor Centre Manager at the Deep Space Tracking Station. Yeah, started there in 2002, and the way that came about for me is that since since I was very young, when I was born back in 1961, and space exploration was the thing of the time, and every kid my age wanted to be an astronaut or a rocket scientist. But I grew up at a wrong time, wrong place, and wrong country to be able to go and pursue that. But as I got into later years and into high school particularly, things started to change. Space exploration became not just two countries in a race with each other. Many nations were doing this kind of work. And I saw the chance for the next generation coming along to actually learn a little bit more about the possibilities they had in pursuing their dreams, perhaps in space science and exploration. So I started talking about it a lot and doing presentations to public groups and school groups, and got occasionally little articles in media and so forth, wrote for a couple of magazines, and just did that for many years. And then one day back in 2002, I got a phone call, and they said, Glen, there's a position at the Deep Space Tracking Station, in our outreach area, and you know a lot about space. Would you like to come and interview for a job at the NASA tracking station? Now, I thought about that for a nanosecond and said yes. And so I went down to Canberra, interviewed for the job. There was two candidates, myself and another person, and crazily enough, they gave the job to me. And I have been there now for the last, over 20 years now. And some of the people who are online tonight, particularly Mike Din, knows me quite well from some of our earlier dealings with things at the tracking station long before I worked there. And we've been good friends ever since. And he's good value to be able to hear the stories that Mike has told me over the years about the early days of the station. Quite something to hear about. So that's just a little bit my background. I have a lot of interests in space, obviously, since I was very young. Read a lot. I love my astronomy and geology, And I get to bring my personal passion for space exploration to the job that I do today, which is far more extensive than just doing the visitor centre, but that's a whole separate talk in itself. Let me just quickly bring up my slide pack here. So I'm going to try to share my screen here. I hope this does exactly what I want it to do. And I should be able to go up to full screen on that. Yep. Just let me know if you're seeing that full screen now. Yep, somebody give me a heads up, thumbs up, thank you. Terrific. So the Canberra Deep Space Communication Complex, for those who don't know us, we are part of NASA's Deep Space Network, one of only 3 stations on the planet that provides 24/7 coverage of all the robotic spacecraft that are out across our solar system, exploring all those planets and moons and asteroids and comets and deep space telescopes looking at the rest of the universe. You can see there on the screen just a nice aerial shot of our station, beautifully nested there in the Tibumbilla Valley. For those who've got really keen eyes, out towards the top right-hand corner of that image, you can see sort of over the close hill, you can see another hill off in the distance there. And sitting on top of that is where Telstra Tower sits in Canberra. So we're about in a straight line, about 19 kilometres from the airport, about 14 kilometres from Telstra Tower, only about 3 kilometres from the suburbs of Canberra. So while we're relatively close to town, it's still a 35-kilometre drive out on those roads, and it's about a 45-minute drive outside of the ACT. So if you haven't been here before, come out to the station, definitely come along. Just want to show you, hopefully, again, a little video is running there on your screen. And video sort of shows you nice shots of our station. So the tracking station dominated by 4 operational antennas, our big 70-metre dish that you can see there in the middle of the screen, 3 operational 34-metre antennas, and 1 currently retired from Deep Space Service. And they're right in the foreground, our 26-metre antenna, Deep Space Station 46, beautiful shot of it there. Originally located at the Honeysuckle Creek tracking station in the ACT, but now relocated to our tracking station at Tibumbilla. So we've got the big 70-metre dish, originally started its life as a 64-metre antenna, and expanded to a 70-metre antenna in the 1980s. And our 3 34-metre antennas, which are what we refer to as beam waveguide antennas. So unlike dishes like the 70-metre antenna and Deep Space Station 45, they have their transmitter receiver systems actually in the centre of the dish. And you can see that in that cone structure in the middle of the antenna there. And today, our beam waveguides actually have all of that system underground. So the new generation of 34-metre antennas will be the ongoing type of antennas that the network will build into the future. The beauty of having multiple smaller dishes is you can actually array them, link them all together so that they form a much larger dish. So a good angle there is you've got the 70-metre dish in the foreground, and right in the far distance there is our 34-metre antenna called Deep Space Station 36. Now, it's a little bit deceptive there, but the distance between the two of them is about 1.5 kilometres. So if you combine those 2 antennas and also with the other dishes that are there, you can actually simulate a single dish that is 1.5 kilometres in size. So that provides you a much larger aperture to receive even smaller signals, finer detail from out there. Our work primarily, of course, is spacecraft communications. I'll just go back a step there and go back to that video. Sorry, I thought that was going to play. There we go. There we go. Let it play again. So our primary work, of course, is spacecraft communications, sending commands to spacecraft so that they know where to go, what to do, what not to crash into, unless you want to crash into it, of course, as we did with the DART mission recently. And then, of course, also act as receivers, receiving all of that valuable data from across the solar system and now even beyond the solar system. Apart from our spacecraft communication work, we also do a little bit of radio astronomy. So that's something we only do in our spare time. It's really the prime activity of dishes like the Parkes Radio Telescope and the Compact Array up at Narrabri and the Australian Square Kilometre Array Pathfinder over in Western Australia. But when we get our opportunity, we do have probably one of the luckiest radio astronomers in the world who gets to use these fine dishes to be able to do their own observation works, primarily observations into the heart of the galaxy, looking at the distribution of gases across the galaxy, and then some extragalactic work as well. So our work is, as I say, much wider than just the spacecraft communications. We also can do that linking up of antennas, not only with our dishes on site, but we can also link with dishes like the Parkes Radio Telescope and others to do very long baseline interferometry, combining the power of all of those dishes to, here in Australia, we can simulate a dish currently at about 800 kilometres in size. So quite powerful instruments that we have. Let me jump back in time, because you've seen some nice views of the station there, but this is the way the station looked when it was first constructed. It started construction of the site in March of 1963, and we had the antenna up and running by August of 64. So ready in time to support the station's very first mission, and that was NASA's Mariner 4 spacecraft. So you can see there in the color image, you've got in the center of the image there, our operations building. To the right there, up on the hill, you've got the original accommodation block and mess hall. The accommodation block, of course, is now part of the visitor center. It has an extension on that, but the mess hall has also been expanded as the station has expanded. So it still operates as our staff cafeteria today. Underneath the operations building there, our original powerhouse, again, it's had many extensions. And then our original antenna you can see two versions of it there in its original, in the color image, in its original 26-meter configuration. And then as its extension there on the black and white photo to a 34, I think that's the 34-meter configuration, pretty sure. So the station started out quite humble beginnings. And as I say, the very first mission that we supported was NASA's Mariner 4. Control rooms at the time, and probably Dean, Peter and others recognize probably a few people in some of these photos. Our original operations control center at the tracking station in what is now the room that we use as our just for our signal processing center. So everything in those days was, perhaps one or two people per pieces of equipment. You can see the beautiful reel-to-reel recorders there in the background. Amazingly, the racks that you can see there, actually, those racks are still there in that room. But as you can imagine, as the technology has developed over the last, 50 or 60 years or so, that while it may have been a single rack doing a single job, today that same rack has a whole range of new equipment in it doing probably hundreds of individual jobs. So if it ain't broke, don't fix it. So the racks are ideal for still doing the work that we do today. It's just the technology that has rapidly changed. And I do have somewhere one of those beautiful headsets that the teams are wearing in there. It's come a long way since that time, certainly. As I say, Mariner 4, the first mission NASA to send out to take the first close-up images of the planet Mars. And that encounter happened on the 14th of July, 1965. So the mission launched in the previous November. We tracked it during the course of that passage off to the planet Mars. And that first flyby took just 21 images of Mars. And Mars presented itself like this to us. It looked a really bleak, crater-covered world. And in fact, to a lot of people who saw these images originally, they were somewhat disappointing, not for the quality of the image, but for what they didn't show us. A living world with canals and Martians racing about on its surface. And we got to see this world which just looked like the moon in many respects. It looked like a very lifeless world, not the world that science fiction that writers like H.G. Wells and astronomers like Percival Lowell and others had depicted, a place that we, felt could be Earth-like, could be a living planet. And all we saw was this dusty, cratered world. Not much more interesting, well, still interesting, but not more interesting than, say, somewhere like the moon. Of course, today we know Mars, it's a very different place. A place that once had rivers and lakes and oceans and salty seas. It would take later missions with better cameras and more coverage of the planet to start to show some of those features, those river-like features and flow features on the surface, which told us the story about past water on Mars. But from those early images of the red planet, it didn't look that promising at that point in time, perhaps, as a place for continued exploration. Of course, as I said, that encounter happened on the 14th of July, 1965. Our station, of course, helped to receive those very first images from the surface of Mars and relaying that to some waiting scientists over at the Jet Propulsion Labs in California. But that date in history has an interesting coincidence for it. So 14th July 1965, on the 14th of July 2015, we received this image, and the first close-up full image of Pluto. So it's kind of interesting as an historical point. Nobody planned it that way, but in 50 years, we went from pretty much one end of the solar system to the other, at least in planetary terms, or the places that we like to think as being planets out there. I still believe Pluto is a full-on planet. So, yeah, that moment in history, of course, was quite important from an historic point of view. Those first images, it became, headlines around the world, and you can see the kind of data that we would have been receiving there in the image on the front of the Sydney Morning Herald. Of course, news cycle is not quite as fast back then as it was today. So it took, a day or so before that we, became front page news. But that data that came back was basically just the ones and zeros, the data from the cameras that had to be processed and translated into actual images. So it's interesting that the paper was not able to show those first images from Mars straight away. There was still to be processed and still to actually, get through on the wire to be, pictures for another day in the newspaper. But it'd be interesting to think, I'm so used today seeing those beautiful color high resolution images from places like Mars. And they're always very exciting, but I kind of wonder what it would be like for somebody around at that particular time. And I was only, 4 years old when this was all happening. So I wasn't reading the papers, but it'd be interesting to know what people actually thought of those first images. We see them maybe as being disappointing today, but I'm wondering how exciting it was for people of that time. I'm sure they were as excited as I get about the wonderful images we see now. Of course, we can jump further into the 1960s. So I was 4 when the Mariner images came through. I was 7, nearly 8, when humans landed on the moon for the very first time. And in Australia, I think a lot of people tend to think that they know a little bit about what happened at that time because, and this is the wider public, of course, because there was a movie. A great Australian film, The Dish, of course, talking about the role of the Parkes Radio Telescope up in New South Wales. But as Mike will definitely remind a lot of people, and Peter and others, and I will certainly do, that's a movie, not a documentary. Of course, Parkes, while being a part of the support for the Apollo missions, was not the prime dishes to be able to support the Apollo 11 and the subsequent missions to the moon. That was the job of what was then known as the Manned Spaceflight Network. Stations like Honeysuckle Creek here in Canberra, and an extended wing that was put onto the station at Tidbinbilla to support the Apollo missions to the moon. So at Tidbinbilla, our dish at that time, our DSS 42, was being used to support the the command module in lunar orbit with Michael Collins. The Honeysuckle Creek station, of course, on that day was supporting the lunar module on the surface and landing and on the surface with Neil and Buzz on board. And it really came down to an interesting sequence of events that made the coverage for the moon landing the way it was. A couple of days before the moon landing, this is my understanding of it, I'm sure somebody will correct me if it's not true, it was going to be our station at Tiboombilla that would have carried the signals from the lunar module. But a fire in a power system for the transmitter for our antenna was damaged in a small fire. Electrical circuits burnt out. And the director at the time at our station, Don Gray, said, well, obviously we're not going to miss out on being part of Apollo 11. Get in there and get that thing fixed. And of course, Honeysuckle was going to be there supporting the command module, but NASA, being the nervy people that they were for this first moon landing, decided to swap that round. And so they said, Tiboombilla, if you're operational, you're on the command module. Honeysuckle Creek's got the lunar module, no problem. We still had the backup use of the Parkes radio telescope, the support on TV. And that was all fine. We're all part of the one team, everybody working together. It didn't really matter who was doing what, but it did come down to Honeysuckle being on point at that time for those TV images. Now, NASA originally wanted to use their 64-meter dish at Goldstone, California, our sister station over in the United States, to receive those first images. They wanted to use an American dish to show Americans walking on the moon, beating the Soviets there, winning the so-called space race. But they had a little problem, because when they first received those TV images from the moon, at the Californian station, they had to relay them over to Houston, Texas, but an incorrect switch setting and dial setting at the Californian station meant that those pictures were not only highly contrasted, and this is the image that they were sending from Goldstone to Houston, with blacks very black, whites very white, you couldn't make out a lot of detail. The initial image that they sent to them was actually, unfortunately, upside down as well. And this was because of an incorrect switch setting at the Goldstone station. The reason why the picture was upside down was, of course, that the camera on the lunar module was upside down. And that was done on purpose, so that when Armstrong came out of the main door of the lunar module, he'd pull a handle that released an equipment shelf, the macer on the outside of the lunar module, which had various pieces of equipment that they would need. Also had the camera mounted on it, and that camera was pointed towards the ladder to get those images of Neil and Buzz stepping onto the surface. But also, it had to be mounted upside down so that its handle would be easily pointed up. So the astronauts could later flick a little catch, take the camera off the macer off the shelf on the outside of the lunar module, mount it on a tripod, and with a cable attachment, take it about 50 feet or so away from the lunar module to be able to get a wider image so that they could continue on doing their work, but the engineers and mission control on the ground could watch them and keep an eye on them. And of course, for the TV coverage for the audience around the world. So picture that they were sending off to Houston from California was upside down and highly contrasted. So they obviously wanted to find another picture, and fast, because Neil's already coming down the ladder. He wasn't going to wait for anybody to fix a problem like a upside down or highly contrasted image. So they looked to Honeysuckle Creek. And this is the image that was coming through Honeysuckle Creek. This is an image taken straight off the monitor there. And you can see it is of a much better quality. Contrast settings were right. They had their switch, the inverter switch, the right way around. So the image was the right way up. And this was the image that the world got to watch. 600 million people around the planet, including me as a 7-year-old sitting at home that day, watching those shimmering images of a human being stepping onto the moon for the very first time. Myself at that time probably didn't realize it was coming to me through the dish at Honeysuckle Creek, but I now get to look out my office window every single day at that dish that brought me those images, and probably in many ways started me on my journey to where I actually work today. So I've kind of come full circle. Parkes came in a little bit later in the broadcast, around about 8 minutes 50 into the broadcast. Their image was starting to improve. My understanding too is that image was being relayed by microwave towers down to Honeysuckle Creek from Parkes and then put back into the NASA circuit. So it was all still going through Honeysuckle and being relayed up to Sydney, broadcast around Australia, and then, of course, relayed via satellite over to the rest of the world. So this was the configuration for that satellite setup. So from Honeysuckle Creek to Sydney, to ABC Studios, relayed up to the OTC station at Moree, relayed via an Intelsat satellite over to the United States, and then relayed to Houston. Also relayed from through the Intelsat satellite to Carnarvon, who was then also doing another relay over to Asia and then further on to Europe. So all of that transmission and relays still takes time, even with the signal traveling at the speed of light. It still takes about 1/3 of a second for that to get to the other side of the planet and broadcast out to other televisions. So here in Australia, we saw it a whole 1/3 of a second before the rest of the planet. So it doesn't sound like much, but it's first, and that's always good to do things first. I'm going to leap forward in history and talk about a little bit more about what we're doing now. So at the tracking station, we're supporting nearly 40 missions representing 27 nations around the world. So we're currently handling missions for NASA, obviously, for the United States. We handle missions for the Indian Space Agency, for the European Space Agency and all the many nations that are part of that organization, for the Japanese Space Agency, JAXA, for the United Arab Emirates, for South Korea, and even New Zealand we're supporting missions for now. So NASA and the Rocket Lab, part of New Zealand's space program, earlier this year launched the Capstone mission to head off to the moon. And next year, New Zealand is talking about, or is going to actually go it alone and send their very own mission off to Venus. And then the year after, participating in launching a mission for NASA, a twin set of spacecraft off to the planet Mars. So even the Kiwis are busy exploring the universe now. But all those nations around the world rely on us in the Deep Space Network and our communication capability to support all of their missions. We have a saying in the Deep Space Network, that's don't leave home without us. I want to point to two key missions there, and I'll talk about some others as we go along. Our longest lived missions out there today, of course, NASA's twin Voyager spacecraft, Voyager 1 and Voyager 2, missions that are very close to our heart, especially at Tidbinbilla and within the Deep Space Network as a whole. Launched in 1977, August and September of that year. I remind kids when they come and visit us that to give them context of how long ago that was, that is, they left Earth just 4 months after the premiere of the very first Star Wars movie. And then I have to tell them it's the good Star Wars movies that we're talking about. So those two spacecraft did the big journeys to have a look at the giant planets, Jupiter, Saturn, Uranus, and Neptune, continuing the reconnaissance of those outer worlds. Voyager 2, of course, being the only spacecraft, so far at least, to have visited the worlds Uranus and Neptune. The Voyagers completed that task in 1989. Since then, they've continued that outward voyage. Voyager 1 traveling at about 17 kilometers a second, Voyager 2 about 15.5 kilometers per second. So on average, they're traveling about 1.4 million kilometers a day through space. So at that speed, after what has now been just over 45 years now that the Voyagers have been out there, Voyager 1, currently our most distant spacecraft, as of today, at 23.72 billion kilometers from home, around about 5 times further away than the orbit of Pluto. Both of those spacecraft are now left well behind the planets and the dwarf planets, now outside of the magnetic bubble of our sun, the heliosphere, and are now in what we term interstellar space, the space between the stars. But the journey to the nearest stars still going to take a long, long time. Sorry, all the science fiction fans out there. Voyager 1 will reach the next closest star on its flight path in just another 296,000 years from now. And even that flight path will only take it 1 light year away from that particular star. So we're not visiting any other solar systems anytime soon. But the vision of the people who built the Voyager spacecraft, of course, to put the golden plaque on board, the golden record, with information about who built it, where it came from, our understandings of science, and pieces of music are on there, and literature, and greetings from people in about 99 different languages. A message in a bottle sent out to a very big ocean, to anybody who might be out there who may find it one day. The future legacy of the Voyager spacecraft is that they will ultimately outlast the Earth and outlast the sun and be the last reminder that we ever existed in the universe. So hopefully somebody finds them before then. And of course, we're busy with Mars. Mars is currently the traffic jam of the solar system. We currently support 11 spacecraft at Mars, but there are actually 13 spacecraft there today. 2 missions that we do not support currently in the Deep Space Network are China's rover and lander. So that's something for the future. There are agreements between China and their space agency and NASA to support their missions in the future, but political differences have sort of put that on hold in the meantime. But we have spacecraft pretty much everywhere out there today. For the station itself, we currently have about 85 staff with those 4 active antennas, supporting about $34 billion in spacecraft. So to do that, we only get about $22 million a year. So that's Australian dollars too. So in US dollars, it's probably around about $17.5 to $18 million, depending on what the exchange rate is at the time. So it's a bargain to actually do the work we do. And budgets are always tight. It's an interesting thing. That's the ongoing battle. It's very different to the way it was in earlier times of the station, where we basically say, what job do you want us to do? And they tell us, and then we say, great, it'll cost you this much. But today it's very tight. The money that's available for space exploration, especially for deep space communication, is getting tougher all the time. But we always seem to do more with less. I think that's the beauty of engineers. They are very good at doing that sort of stuff. In my work, of course, I'm also not only handling seeing well over 10,000 school students a year out there, but I also handle a whole range of different things as part of the management team for the site, looking after personnel and services. I'm currently heading our security area and a lot of interagency work as well, particularly at the moment with JAXA and some of the other NASA operations stuff that we do in Australia. So the Deep Space Network, 3 stations around the world. So I mentioned them, that we're part of that overall network. Our station in Canberra, one in Madrid, Spain, one in Goldstone, California. The beauty of the 3 stations, separated by roughly 1/3 of the world each. So if the Earth rotates, there's always one station watching every part of the universe around us. We take all of our data and it all goes back to the Jet Propulsion Labs in Pasadena, California. That then is the distribution network to all of the other agencies around the world, wherever they happen to be and whoever's missions we happen to be supporting. The station is, while it's part of NASA's Deep Space Network and all of its funding comes from NASA, it is actually managed in Australia by the CSIRO. They're our current parent organisation, our current contractors. So we're part of a larger body within CSIRO known as Space and Astronomy Business Unit, and it's part of a much larger collection of organisations within CSIRO again called National Facilities and Collections, which looks after the National Insect Collection, the National Fire Collection. It does bushfire research, it does marine research, and a whole range of other things. But it also manages a whole range of different radio astronomy facilities, from the compact array up at Narrabri in New South Wales, the MOPRA antenna at Coonabarabran, the Parkes Radio Telescope, of course, the dish, all operated through the Radiophysics Laboratory in Marsfield up in Sydney, and with their facilities over in Western Australia, particularly the Murchison Radio Observatory at Bellardi Station, part of the Australian Square Kilometre Array Pathfinder. So the initial hub for the largest square kilometre array project between Australia and South Africa to create a radio telescope, permanent radio telescope, about 1/3 the size of the Earth. CSIRO managed the station at Tidbinbilla on NASA's behalf, of course. They're now also managing the European Space Agency station over at New Norcia in Western Australia. So just their ability to manage facilities like this is sort of an ideal arrangement And NASA and the Europeans are, get the benefit of not having to have their own people out here and to have locals to be able to manage those facilities for them. Just from an organisational requirement, this is kind of a bit of a spaghetti chart. We just understand how it all works. So as the treaty signed between Australia and the United States back in February of 1960 for space communications and spacecraft tracking. So you've always got that governing treaty level agreement between our two nations to work together. Then you've got sort of an agency agreement. So in the United States, they give the responsibility for space to NASA, of course. Up until just a few years ago, Australia didn't have its own space agency. So we did have a couple of organisations who within government did have responsibility, particularly the Australian Space Office, up until about 1996. But then responsibility was given to the CSIRO and their work in the space area to be able to look after space activities. Now, obviously, space activities in Australia are now sitting with the Australian Space Agency. CSIRO, though, continues to manage all their own facilities, and under the contract, they have that agency-to-agency agreement. You can see there with the red arrows between NASA and CSIRO to work together to continue doing that work. They're also now managing the contractual and financial and policy and management arrangements there as well. So Space and Astronomy look after that. They manage the station on NASA's behalf. You go back the other way, NASA subcontracts the Jet Propulsion Labs in California, part of the California Institute of Technology, to manage their interplanetary missions. And they have a subdivision called the Interplanetary Mission Directorate. And I think the best job in the world is the person who is the director of the Interplanetary Mission Directorate. That's a really great title to put on a business card, I think. And then they manage, the Interplanetary Mission Directorate, they do the spacecraft operations. So they're the ones telling us what we need to do to support which missions at what time. So JPL are kind of our Lord of Masters directly. NASA, they've got all the money. CSIRO just look after us from a day-to-day point of view. At least we get paid. That's the important thing. So lots of different functions that we have at the tracking station. As I said before, not only work in spacecraft tracking, but in telemetry, command and control. We do a lot of software and systems development of the station. So we're actually the station of excellence for particularly software development for operating our temporal dependency network, the TDN, the timing systems that we use, all of the software we use for tracking. We've done a lot of improvements to that over the year. We've developed a lot of automation with that software as well. So automating some of their tracking operations actually gives more time for the operators now to handle more missions and more antennas. So again, go back into the early days, and that black and white photo I showed you of the early sort of control room, you'd have a whole lot of people, maybe one or two people per rack or per console, operating one antenna, one spacecraft. Today, the automation now allows us to have one operator managing 3 antennas simultaneously in any location around the world in a deep space network, and handling up to 6 spacecraft at the same time. So we've come a long way, and the work that their station has done in that area has certainly given us much more capacity to do even more work. We do a lot of radio science, of course, in that radio astronomy area. We do the interferometry, we do some biostatic radar work, using our antennas as a sort of sonar system for the solar system, bouncing signals off near-Earth asteroids to do observations, building up sort of radio images of those objects, being able to learn more about their size, their rotational rates, some of the compositional information, and also being able to find, quite often these days, finding binary asteroid systems, particularly little moonlets. And for those who watched a few weeks ago, we had the DART spacecraft targeted towards the double asteroid system of Dimorphos and Didymos and Dimorphos, Dimorphos being the smaller of the two that they impacted with. Dimorphos, the small asteroid, was not known about until those near-Earth asteroid observations were done, particularly through our station in Goldstone, California. So that's how it was first observed, to know that there was a moonlet, and then for that pair to be chosen for that impact activity, which we were very much involved in bringing those pictures down during that last fly-in and impact just a couple of weeks ago. The station, mentioned before, dominated by a big dish, Deep Space Station 43. It still remains the largest steerable parabolic dish here in the Southern Hemisphere. It's still one of the largest in the world, used for spacecraft communications. Next year, we're going to mark 50 years of operations for that antenna. It hasn't remained the same over those 50 years. It's had a lot of upgrades. As I mentioned, it started off as a 64-meter antenna, expanded to a 70-meter dish in the 1980s to support the ongoing Voyager missions. It remains today the only dish in the world capable of communicating with both Voyager spacecraft. Voyager 2 has now moved so far south of the ecliptic of the planets around the sun that now for the Northern Hemisphere stations, they can't see Voyager 2 simply because the Earth is in the way. Voyager 1 still above our northern horizon, so we can still send a commanding to both those spacecraft. In 2020, just as the pandemic hit, we were due to start a major 11-month upgrade for that antenna to do a complete refit, new transmitters, new receivers, new electrical systems, new coolant systems, and so on. We managed to do that, brought the whole project still in on time and on budget. It was a lot of hard work by some incredibly dedicated people that work at the tracking station. And really, that's what the station is all about, incredibly dedicated people. The 3 operational antennas on site, those beam waveguides. Now, they're not going to be the only beam waveguides that we will have. We're actually preparing now for the next antenna to come in on site, which will be Deep Space Station 33. And in that image, you can see on the screen there, right on the right-hand side of the image, about a quarter of the way down from the top, you can see a little tree. Sitting right next to that tree is a little tiny white marker, which you can't see in that image, but that is going to be the center point for a brand new dish. And that is going to be an antenna like this. Currently at our Californian station, they're building the first of a new generation of dishes for the network. Now, all of our work for the last nearly 60 years has been in radio communications, but radio spectrum is getting noisier and noisier around the world. More radios, more televisions, more mobile phone networks, more satellites in the sky, more planes flying over. It's noisy. And we want to pick up signals from a long, long way away, whispers from the depths of the solar system and beyond. Typical signals we get back from, say, a spacecraft like Voyager can be over 24 billion times weaker than the power generated by a tiny watch battery. So to be able to detect those little signals is getting more and more difficult. A lot of our processing work just goes into eliminating that random radio noise generated around the world. And there's no special frequencies really set aside for science. So we really keep continuing to move into higher and higher frequencies. So for the upcoming Artemis missions, we're going to be pushing more and more into higher K-band frequencies, right up into the high gigahertz. So we're already looking at a frequency range now that gets us up to about 32.3 gigahertz. We're going to be moving up into the 36 gigahertz range. And ultimately, even that is going to get filled up. So the plan is to move to optical. Now, we can't move to optical straight away because we still have a lot of legacy spacecraft out there that are going to be using radio for many, many years to come. So the plan is to build this hybrid. And that's putting in the interior section of the antenna a set of mirrors. And those mirrors will be sensitive, particularly in the mid-infrared frequencies. And we'll be utilizing those to be able to receive signals from some spacecraft which are planning to use optical. And the first one to take advantage of it will be the Psyche mission. Psyche is a mission planned to go off to the asteroid Psyche, which astronomers, scientists believe is the core remnant of a failed planet. And they want to be able to go and have a look at this metal-rich world. So it is going to have its radio communication capability, but also optical. So optical at the moment, okay for receiving, but not so much yet for transmitting. Capabilities to be able to send an optical signal powerful enough for a tiny receiver on a distant spacecraft is still in the works. So we're going to be still doing radio for a long, long time yet for uplink. Downlink moving into that optical range. So the first antenna to take advantage of this is currently under construction in Goldstone, California. It'll be Deep Space Station 23. That should be operational in 2026 so that the Psyche mission, due to launch next year, will be able to take advantage of it. We start construction of our new antenna, Deep Space Station 33, in the end of 2025 and due to be online in early 2029. And that will be able to support other missions which are planning to go out there. And that includes the ongoing Artemis missions, because Artemis itself will move out of radio and go optical ultimately, because of the high data rates needed to be able to support human spaceflight. Our control room today is, again, very different to the way you saw in that earlier black and white image. Our room is quite large, dominated by these individual consoles, 8 in the room, plus a central console for the supervisor for those particular teams. From any of those consoles that you can see there, they can handle multiple spacecraft, whether it be here in Canberra or in Spain or in California. The way we operate the network is follow the sun. So again, in years past, it used to be that station operating their antennas and dealing with the spacecraft that were on their schedule. Today, at whatever station is in daylight, that station runs the entire network. So our operators can bring up multiple links on their screens at any location, any sets of antennas, any combination of antennas, and any spacecraft they happen to be talking to. So it's putting a lot of additional workload on the operators, a lot more for them to monitor. But those automation systems, the artificial intelligence, some things we put in place for some spacecraft and some activities has made that job easier in some respects, more complex in others. So it's going to be interesting to see how that continues to develop over the next few years. More antennas coming online, many, many more spacecraft going out there, and of course, adding in human space flight with the Artemis program. The big mission at the moment, the James Webb Space Telescope, of course, launched last Christmas Day. That was a terrific day for us out at the station. They promised us it wouldn't launch on Christmas Day, but it did. And it was a solid 36 hours out there, getting first contact with the spacecraft as it launched, getting it on its way, its first course correction maneuver to get it out to the Lagrange point, out to be able to do its observation work. It has been a time-consuming mission. It is one of the few spacecraft that gets 24-hour coverage in the network because it is in constant operation. It is bringing back gigabytes of data every single day, including beautiful images like that one you can see in the background there, looking at a galaxy cluster and the gravitational lensing that cluster is causing, bringing into view even more distant galaxies out there in the early universe. So can't wait to see what else this spacecraft brings back to us over the next potentially 10 to 20 years of operation. Our big concentration at the moment is Artemis, the return to the moon, getting back into human space flight as we did back in the days of Apollo, and also supporting some of the early space shuttle missions. And here we are right on the precipice of being able to send humans back. I'm sure you all know we've had couple of launch delays, an additional delay because of a hurricane going through the Florida area, but currently set on the schedule for about 3:30 p.m. Canberra time on November 14th. We're hoping that it gets off the pad. So third time lucky, as we say, and it will get out in this mission. This first mission is an uncrewed flight, testing the full-scale test of the Space Launch System launch vehicle and the Orion capsule that will eventually carry crews to the moon, to the Lunar Gateway, and then transferring to a landing vehicle, in the first instance supplied by SpaceX, their human landing system, which is yet to have its first flight. So there's a lot of things that have got to happen before we get a crew back on the surface of the moon. But if it all sticks to schedule, this test flight this November, it'll be a 25-day flight, returning shortly in early December. If that is all successful, then 2024, they'll put a crew on board and fly around the moon and back again, similar to what happened with Apollo 8. And then 2025, crew on board, get down to the surface and boots on the moon again with the next man, the first woman, and the first people of colour. This time, multiple people, up to 4, on that crewed mission down to the surface. So Artemis is going in great strides at the moment. New parts are being delivered for Artemis 2, 3, 4, and 5 now to the manufacturers, and deliveries to the Cape over the last few days, particularly. And so they're going for it. It's really great to see that there is such a drive. It's, again, like everything in NASA, is being done on incredibly tight budgets and having to bring in commercial operators to assist in that program. But if it all goes to plan, I'm really happy to think that, just like me as that excited 7-year-old watching Armstrong and Aldrin stepping onto the moon and Apollo, that there'll be a whole new generation watching this next crew stepping onto the moon, men and women and people of all different backgrounds, to continue our exploration, build up a base of operations there, live and work in space for longer periods of time. So then we can take the next great leap for humanity, and that's off to the planet Mars sometime in the next 20 years or so. And that's where I'm going to leave it. The tracking station, I'm going to stop sharing my screen. I hope you're all still with me, because you've been very quiet out there. Yeah, you're all still there. So we've got some really exciting times ahead, and it's going to be happening again through the tracking station with the men and women there. We'll continue to do what we do every day, and that's make history. We stand on the shoulders of giants from places like Carnisock Creek and Aurora Valley and Kubi Creek and Island Lagoon and Carnarvon and Mache, and all those from the other tracking stations around the world. So great history, and a great history ahead as well. So I'll leave it at that. If anybody's got any questions, throw them at me. I've talked way too long, I know, because I just waxed lyrical.
Hi, Glenn. Thanks for coming. And for people who don't know, we're going to have Glenn a little bit later on tonight, but I was running late. So really, thank you so much, Glenn, for stepping up. It looks like we've interrupted your dinner, have we?
That's okay.
And by the way, that image on screen is not a moon of a planet, it's my head. But anyway, thank you. That was fantastic. For the people in the room here, for Glenn to be able to hear these questions, you need to come up to the microphone. While you're doing that, I've got a couple of questions. You talked about the optical new generation of receivers in the optical. Is the Earth's atmosphere going to have an impact on that communication capability? Obviously, optical and optical astronomy has that problem.
Yeah. So one of the things I've had to do is do some sky surveys at our station. So we actually put in a small little observatory dome and a 14-inch scope, and also a couple of sky survey cameras across site to just see how what cloud cover light is like over a typical couple of years at the tracking station. They're doing the same at Goldstone and at Madrid. And surprisingly, despite all the bad weather we've had of late, Canberra has lower overall cloud cover than Madrid or Goldstone, which I was really quite surprised by. But because we're going to be working in the infrared, or mid-infrared, where it does have the sky, and particularly moisture in the atmosphere, will actually reduce the what's the word I'm looking for? The efficiency of that. So there's a bit of an attenuation to the signal that happens. So that's why the optical system that we have has to be very finely tuned, very accurate surface to maximize that capability. I think there's a bit of a trade-off in increased data rates that we'll be able to do. So you'll be going from megabytes per second to hundreds of megabytes or gigabytes per second in data rates. So I think that they really will get back more data, even if we have less communication time. But at this stage, as I said, look, this is all early days for optical communication. There may be a need to be able to put other antennas in other locations. So there's a bit of a discussion of potentially putting another antenna out at somewhere like, say, Alice Springs. And so if it is cloudy in Canberra, then you probably have that second location, say like Alice Springs or somewhere else, as a backup to that. But yeah, it's still there's a lot of things that they have to think through. And of course, uplink is not possible at the moment through that system.
Right.
At least not now. They're working on it.
No worries. Mike Dinner's raised his hand. So, Mike, if you'd unmute yourself and ask your question. Good to see you, by the way, Mike.
Mike's going to correct me on something, I'm sure.
No. You did very good, Glen. Very good. No, I'm just going to make a comment on your last. To me, I expect optical will be complementary to radio. I don't think for a long time it's not going to be a substitute. I mean, no one's going to land on the moon and rely and hope there aren't thick clouds at Tidbit Miller. So I would expect radio and optical to work together for a long time into the future. That's all.
Yeah. I think you're probably right, Mike. It's probably at least a good 30 years or more. But one of the things that they're talking about for Artemis is actually setting up a laser relay communication satellite network around the moon. So radio will, for lunar stuff in the future, and we're still talking decades down the line, that optical will be the way that they go. One of the things they can do with optical just from moon is that they don't have to relay back to the Deep Space Network. And in fact, tests that they've done with missions that are out there right now, they've actually been relaying back to optical observatories in Hawaii and other locations. So there is actually a capability to do that. But of course, obviously, working optical observatories are doing just that. They don't have a lot of spare time to be doing communications work. So it may end up being optical receivers in orbit and then relaying via radio down to the ground, or having tighter laser communication. So there's a whole range of different architectures they could use. But yeah, you're quite right. It's still going to be radio for a long time yet.
For those that are not aware, we've got one of the celebrities in the room, Mike Dinn, I believe is a former deputy director of Honeysuckle Creek and then director of Tidbit Miller back in the last century.
Yeah, that's how I first met Mike in the 90s, 94, I think it was.
All right. Back in my day. Steve Humble's raised his hand. So, Steve, you want to unmute yourself, ask a question?
I was just curious on the large radio antennas. Do you have more than one pickup so you can receive signals that are off center to help with aligning it, or do you sort of just know exactly where to point without having more than one pickup?
Yeah, so the data we get from the predict data we get from the missions gives us our position to our point positions for the various spacecraft we need to talk to, and based on all the calculations of where we are and where we are at the time of day and our rotation and orbit around the sun and everything else. The antennas, particularly the 34-meter antennas, do have acquisition aids with them, so they have a wider field of view. That's than the big dishes, which have a narrow field of view. So we do use those to be able to sort of fine tune for spacecraft. But when we're talking about when I'm talking about those spacecraft, it's usually spacecraft that are relatively close, or missions that have just launched, because whenever a spacecraft, an interplanetary mission or Deep Space Telescope launches, it's coming up over Canberra first. So that's where those acquisition aids come into play, to be able to pick up those signals and then fine tune the position with the main beam of the antenna. For deep space missions, because the signal footprint is so large, by the time it comes to us or gets to it, then that's not quite as don't have to be quite as specific as using acquisition aids. You just basically tune in with the narrow beam on the big dish. Mars is a good example of that. The signal footprint, by the time our signal gets to Mars, or if we're receiving from Mars, the signal footprint is much larger than Mars itself. So anything in that field of view, we're going to be able to receive from. We don't have to actually have a specific point at the spacecraft. We just have to point at the middle of Mars to get those signals back.
Oh, I've got one similar question. For doing radio telescope images, do you guys use some sort of scanning pattern, or how are radio telescope images produced?
That's an excellent question. I'm not a radio astronomer. In radio astronomy, it's just a different part of the electromagnetic spectrum, a different way of seeing. So I kind of put it to akin, our radio astronomer, when he's showing me the plots that he gets, it's just dots on a graph. If they're going to produce a radio image from it, you're taking all those dot points and building up virtually a map like the barometric pressure maps you might see on the nightly news when they're doing the weather. You're connecting points of the same and similar radio frequencies, and from that you build up a map image of those areas of intense and less intense radio emission. Those different frequencies are indicating different elements. So every element has its own frequency. And from that, you build up a radio image of something. So very different from what you might see of, from an optical image. You'd be able to see through all the obscuring dust and gas and connect up these areas of high and low radio intensity, just like you might look at a higher and low pressure systems in weather. And then you build up your maps from that. You might color assign that based on the types of elements that you're or the level of intensity of that image. So if I had an illustration, I could probably in front of me. I don't, unfortunately. I'm just looking for it. But yeah, it's kind of best way to think about it. It's like the weather map, but you're connecting up areas of radio intensity, not air pressure intensity.
Thanks for that
That's
question.
my explanation for it anyway.
No worries. We're going to take another question from Julian Timmers. Julian, you there? Just unmute yourself, mate, if you're there.
Yeah, I'm here. How you going? I didn't have a question.
Have you still got a question or not?
No.
Okay, I've got a question while we're waiting. How soon after the launch of the Artemis rocket are you going to be involved?
Under the current timeline, about 55 minutes after launch, it comes into our local horizon. We'll have initial acquisition here in Australia, and then it kind of does it comes up over our western horizon, comes up only about 15 degrees above our horizon locally, and then sets again. So we actually only have it in our field of view for about 11 minutes. And then because of the Earth, the spacecraft's outward trajectory, and the Earth overtakes its speed and outward trajectory. So then it falls below the horizon again. Madrid takes over, and then it'll go into Goldstone's field of view and then come back into our field of view about 17 hours later. During its outward journey to the moon. So that's the current timeline. When at time of launch, if it goes at the start of its launch window, we'll be in control of the network and in control of Madrid and Goldstone. So we'll be us controlling, but their antennas, having the throughput of signal.
Okay, Mike didn't raise his hand. Mike, you on?
Back again.
Or maybe it was. Are you there, Mike?
Looks like it's having a frozen moment.
Just going to add on the radio astronomy, if SAA was interested, Glen could probably organise a team radio astronomer to explain some of the things that have been done at Tidbinbilla. And for example, I think Glen, at one time the furthest radio star was defined through Tidbinbilla. But so a thought for you if you wanted to pursue that with Glen.
Yeah, happy to put you in contact. Shinji Hiroshi is our current radio astronomer. And I've heard him speak. He's very, very good. Does have a sort of semi-heavy Japanese accent, but he's an enthusiastic speaker and has done some great talks that I've seen him do.
Or Dave Jaunty for historical aspects.
Yep.
Fantastic.
Just to give you a sense too, just in this last year, we've had over 40 papers come out on the radio astronomy work that we've done through the 70-meter antenna. So a lot of good science is being produced out of it.
Fantastic. As replicating 50 years ago, we're starting to have a few comms issues. So we might draw a line under there, Glen, for the moment. Thank you so much for coming in fairly late notice and even being brought on early tonight. We really appreciate that. Fascinating.
Okay.
Obviously, if you could stay around online tonight, we'd love to have you. Maybe we can open up again later on in the night and
I'll stick around. And I noticed there's a whole bunch of sort of little questions in the chat there. So while you continue on, I might just put some answers in the chat for those people who asked online.
Fantastic, and then everyone can see them. Fantastic. All right,
Yeah.
thanks again. We'll give Glen a round of applause.
Thanks.
Okay, we're back, guys and girls. Why is this advancing by itself? Okay, guys, we're going to get back to the meeting. Thanks for all that. I'm Peter, the president. So this is kind of the introduction I was supposed to do before, but obviously we've gone ahead of that. I like these two pictures of the sun and the moon with a SpaceX rocket going in front. It's quite good. So the original plan was to have some Space Association news, Australian news, and then Glen, but we've obviously flipped that around, so you can work it out, I'm sure. We've got some international news, and then we're going to hand over to Andrew Rennie, Planetary and Space Science Update. So I think he's got a pretty packed program tonight as well. So we'll probably finish about 9:20. So for those not familiar, we do a weekly radio show called The Space Show on Southern FM, live streamed and also podcast. And the podcast channel, if you just search up The Space Show Australia, there is a space show in the US, but it's not the same. Still ticking over from previous few months, we did run the survey about what we could possibly do as an organisation with some of the funds that we've accumulated. That survey's been out for a while. We didn't get any responses. However, we do know that there is a response that's being created, put together at the moment with some research and discussions. Hopefully in the next few weeks, we'll have more to share about that. And it looks pretty exciting from what I've been able to see so far. Just on the calendar, we're still trying to nail down this Apollo 17 thing. I think we're okay, but anyway, mark the 10th of December in your calendars. Keep that free, late afternoon, evening, to have something out at the Sun Theatre, a movie we've got in mind, and maybe a couple of activities around that. So once again, still trying to nail down the final details of that. As people may or may not have been aware, we've had several. Sorry. Oh, for the Apollo 17. Yeah. Oh, well, they'll have to do their own thing. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Someone in the room has just mentioned there may be something happening in Canberra on that same day to mark the Apollo 17 mission. So obviously, if you're in Canberra, go for it. We'll let you know through our channels as well what's happening up there as well. People may want to travel up there. It'd be a good event, no doubt. So our event would be over at Sun Theatre in Yarraville, just over the other side of the Westgate Bridge. The association itself runs on memberships, and everyone's a volunteer. So if you're a member, thank you so much. If you're not a member, we'd love you to join. If you're a lapsed member, come back. We'd love to have you back. Geez, we're getting down the calendar now. These meetings, lining up 2 more meetings after tonight, November 28 and December 12. You'll notice that's not the 4th Monday of the month, a couple of weeks earlier. And we usually have a trivia night or something else special going on that. We haven't quite nutted all those details out yet, but Tim, have you done anything? No? Okay. We'll let you know. It should be good. Maybe we'll have a poker night. So yeah, next meeting is November 28. Sad note this week, Apollo astronaut and Gemini astronaut Jim McDivitt passed away at the age of 93. According to reports, he died in his sleep on October 13 at his home in Tucson, Arizona. So a bit sad, but he's a ripe old age. He was a ripe old age. So just a quick note about Jim. He was, after he graduated first in his class, the Bachelor of Science degree in Aeronautical Engineering at the University of Michigan. He, through the Air Force Institute of Technology program, qualified as a test pilot and logged over 2,500 flight hours, of which 2,000 hours were in jet aircraft. He was a chase pilot for Robert M. White, not related to Ed White, in an X-15 on the in 1962. He achieved an altitude of 95.8 kilometers. And he was then selected, Jim was selected for the Group 2 astronauts. And you can see that picture of those Group 2 astronauts, quite an accomplished group in there: John Young, Neil Armstrong, Ed White, Frank Borman, etc., etc. Need to go on. Unfortunately, a couple of those people passed away before they were able to go into space, or at least one of them anyway, Elliot C. I think all the others flew, from my recollection. Yes. Yep. So his first space flight was with Ed White, commanding the Gemini 4 mission, and with Ed doing the first US spacewalk, not the first spacewalk, the first US spacewalk. And then he flew again on Apollo 9 and was a commander of that, where they tested for the first time in space the lunar module. This was in Earth orbit. It's a 10-day mission, and they tested all the skills that were required to do a moon mission, flying the two craft separately, boosting orbits, changing configuration, testing out the EVA spacesuit there by Rusty Swigert, and disconnecting, undocking, and then relocating and docking back with the two spacecraft, transferring between the two spacecraft, of course. Then also separating the lunar module ascent and descent stages, etc., etc. So quite a comprehensive test of the Apollo architecture. After he landed, he decided to move into management, and he turned down a number of opportunities, including the Air Force Manned Orbiting Laboratory, Secretary of the Space Council, even to fly on Apollo 13. He must have known something. He became manager of the lunar landing operations and then manager of Apollo spacecraft program, taking responsibility for Apollo 12 through 16. Interestingly enough, you find out these things, he resigned his position after hearing that Gene Cernan had been assigned to command Apollo 17. Cernan had recently crashed a helicopter, which McDivitt felt was a significant concern. His objection, though, was overruled, so he left once Apollo 16 mission was over. Wonder how he got on with Gene Cernan after that. I don't know. He retired from the US Air Force with the rank of Brigadier General in '72, and he left NASA to take a position in at the Consumers Power Company. That must have been a real letdown, but anyway, probably the pay was good. '75, he joined the rail transport company Pullman, and 7 months later, he became the president of Pullman Standard Division. In '81, he went to work for Rockwell International, now part of Boeing, and senior vice president for government operations and international in Washington, DC. He retired in 1985. I'd never met him, unfortunately. I'm not sure anyone in the room had met him. Len Helpman had met him. A few people here have been to various space fests in the US where a lot of these astronauts would come, and from all reports, everyone I've read about, everyone I've heard about said Jim McDivitt was a true gentleman, and I have no cause to doubt that. So he'll be sadly missed, and a life well lived. Oh, yeah. Come up here and talk in the mic so they can all hear.
Len Halpern, can I say in a good way, no derogatory way, I did get to meet him at Space Fest 2016, and he was very friendly and amiable. All the ladies that I met there said he was very keen and had an eye for them and may, in modern terms, be classified as inappropriate. But I don't say that with any disrespect at all. I think he played on the fact that he was an old man and he could get away with things, but he liked the ladies very much. And there was a lot of fun at that Space Fest.
You know what? That quality, or that lack of quality, seemed to be rather recurrent in the astronaut Gene Cernan, Al Bean. Shall we go on? So yes, lots of guys, lots of people. Yeah, why not? All right, we've got a bit of a roundup of Australian space news, just a very short roundup. And I won't read every line here. Who remembers that show? Wasn't that great? Frontline. I'm Mike Moore. Yeah. So Gilmour Space is to launch Australia's first orbital rocket early next year. So it's going to be the Eris rocket. It'll be the first orbital rocket, the first orbital launch attempt from a commercial launch site in Australia. So it's planned to deliver up to 305 kilograms in Earth, and they're going to go off from the Bowen Orbital Spaceport in Abbott Point Port in northern Queensland. So I Try to look up at the map on that. It seems a fair way inland, but anyway. So this is a graphic of its location. Good luck. So the Bowen Orbital Spaceport project is another example of Australian rocket company establishing its own infrastructure to launch its own rockets. So there's quite a number of them now emerging. There's Whalers Way Launch Complex in South Australia, and an equatorial launch up in Arnhem Space Centre in Northern Territory. And there's a few other places on the map there that you can see. Obviously, there's Woomera, which has been around for years and years and years, but I don't think we're planning to launch anything from into space from there, or orbital anyway. There was the Cape York International Spaceport proposed years ago, which I don't think ever got anywhere. Anyway, so this year's International Astronautical Congress, Gilmour Space Technology announced new plans to launch a dedicated rideshare mission in late 2024, named Caravan 1. The mission will be carried aboard Gilmour's Iris Block 2. So this is the second version of that Iris rocket with a lifting capacity of 1,000 kilograms. So they're going to have a Gilmour Space Modular Satellite platform. So they'll be able to take CubeSats and other types of things in that platform. So good luck to them. They seem to be getting lots of funding and lots of advertising. They haven't seen much get off the ground with Gilmour, but anyway, we wish them all the best. So Australian spacesuits may negate impact of microgravity. This is a story that appeared on the ABC recently. So this is the spacesuits for preserving human health and mobility research program over the next 2 years. So the project was successfully received a grant from the Australian Space Agency and International Space Investment Expand Capability Grant opportunity. There has been early versions of this compression suit or suit that's been constructed and designed back in 2015 and 2017. Flew on the International Space Station, and this company is called so what was the name again? Human Aerospace. What is it? Yeah, Human Aerospace. So they're based in Australia. I think they're actually based in Melbourne. And one of the lead of the CEO of that group is Dr. James Waldie, who actually spoke to the Space Association a number of years ago. In fact, I think it was 2016, and when we were meeting down in Elstonwick, and the gravity loading countermeasure skin suit. So obviously it's progressed on from there. He's now built this business around it, getting some funding from the space agency. So good luck with that. The idea being that obviously being in weightless environment has a negative effect on a lot of the body systems and muscles and all that sort of stuff. So this countermeasure suit mechanically applies pressure and tension on the human body to mitigate some of those effects. So good luck. Maybe we'll try and get James back, get an update for what he's doing. The registration is open for the 2022 Southern Space Conference. That'll be in the ACT in November, in about a month, in Canberra, presented by the Space Industry Association of Australia, and it brings together industry experts and decision makers across Australia. It'll also be introduced by the Australian Space Agency head, Enrico Palermo. So I'm not going to labour on this too much, but it looks like there's a good range of subjects and a good range of speakers will be involved in that. So if you're interested and you're available, there are fees associated with it, whether you're a member or a non-member. Obviously, you're a member, the fees are much, much lower of the Space Industry Association. But if you're in that field, probably a great place to be and to rub shoulders with the people that matter. Sydney has been selected to host the International Astronautical Congress in 2025. So the vote was made at the International Astronautical Congress in Paris back in September. It's been hosted annually since 1950, and Australia has hosted a couple of times. We had it in Melbourne in 1998 and also in Adelaide in 2017. At which time in 2017 is when they announced the formation of the Australian Space Agency. So maybe we'll have some more things to announce in 2025, you know. Black Sky Aerospace announces locally developed missile systems. inspired by recent conflict in Ukraine to help build a sovereign missile capability. So company is one of the few businesses in Australia producing solid rocket motors, technical boosters, and common use boosters and solid rocket fuel. So they were granted $500,000 in the funding from the Commonwealth Government as part of the Advanced Manufacturing Growth Centre managed commercialisation fund. So Blake Nikolic is the CEO of that group, and once again, he was driven to develop by the system by analysing the Ukraine battlefield, and it's the need for a light, portable, and versatile missile. So testing of guided weapons will continue. Excuse me. Testing of guided weapons will continue at secure locations to raise technological readiness and levels in preparation for commercialisation in 2023. So there we go. Maybe we should wear a hard hat. Spirit satellite is now booked for a launch in early 2023. Spirit Space, first selected for funding by the Australian Space Agency, has been booked by launch provider IC Space to blast off on a Falcon 9 rocket, Transporter 8, in April next year, 2023. It's been designed and built by the consortium led by the Melbourne Space Laboratory at the Melbourne University. And for those people that were around, we had a visit to the Melbourne Space Laboratory back, when was that? Back in March, April this year. Yeah, it was fascinating. And so we saw some of the hardware and the prototype hardware, the design hardware that they were doing involved in that. And it looks really exciting. So they run a suite of powerful scientific instruments, cameras, guidance systems, etc. And they've also partnered with the Italian Space Agency and University of Melbourne, Sotel Australia, Innovore Technologies, and Newman Space with Nova Systems. The Italian Space Agency is supplying an advanced X-ray detector. The Newman Space Systems, they have a thruster that they've designed and will be testing on the satellite as well. And it's actually quite interesting because we saw a test article of that and we saw their little camera that they designed. That's it there. It points at the thruster. So we should be able to see some either, I'm not sure about video, but some images of that thruster firing. Look, this is my Australian space news segment. It's not fully comprehensive. We don't have time for that. I just want to share with you some of the sources I have been using. One is the Space Industry Association of Australia website. It's quite interesting. There's also Space Connect Online, which is an excellent website, .com.au. They run some really good articles, but also some excellent podcasts. So if you subscribe to their podcast, there's some quite good content in there and feature articles and feature interviews with different people. Space Australia is also another great website with some great content. And you probably recognize some of the images and the titles of some of the stories that I've put on today's report. And also they've got a reporter that we are familiar with, V. Tran, who's a member of the Space Association, a doctor, and she was running the medical experiments on the glutes, I think it was a few months ago. So yeah, good on you, V. Great work. And she's quite active. And I think she's in South Australia at the moment. So there we go. There he is. Now, this was my slide to introduce Glen, but he's already been here. So hi, Glen. And there's my slide for you. Thank you. I'll continue on with some global space news. And I'll let that run for a couple of cycles because I like it. Just watch Buzz's face. What a horrible time that was. Anyway, enough editorial. Okay, the Department of Defence is eyeing options to provide SAP communications in Ukraine as it continues talks with SpaceX. As people may have heard, SpaceX had floated the idea of not funding the initial deployment or the deployment of Starlink satellites to assist them. During a briefing in October 14, has been communicating with SpaceX regarding Starlink, declined to comment on the substance of the discussions. Basically, Elon Musk was warning that the SpaceX will suspend Starlink unless the US government agrees to foot the bill. They're a business, I suppose that's kind of fair enough. They declined to confirm whether the Pentagon will pay for Starlink specifically and insisted it will examine other options. We continue to talk with SpaceX and other companies about SATCOM communication, but won't go into further details. That graphic there shows the coverage that they've set up for Ukraine using the Starlink system. And this is a picture of a Starlink receiver there, which has been deployed. So there's several hundred of those, I believe, in the country. According to Twitter posts, in the days following Russia's invasion of Ukraine, Musk moved to send over satellite terminals in response to a request by Ukraine. And in February 26, 2 days after Russia's launch invasion, Starlink service had been turned on in the country. And 2 days later, initial shipment of at least several dozen terminals arrived. In March, he tweeted that they had made some software changes to reduce the power consumption and also, I believe, to provide additional security and encryption so it would be harder to what's the word, scram or whatever they call it. So they're trying to do what we can do, blah, blah, blah. And on Sunday, the 16th of October, Elon Musk said his rocket firm will continue funding its Starlink internet service in Ukraine the day after he said it would no longer do so. It could no longer do so, I should say. And he tweeted, to hell with it, even though Starlink is still losing money and other companies are getting billions of taxpayer dollars, we'll just keep funding Ukraine for the government for free, he tweeted. So SpaceX, he's saying, is not asking to recoup the past expenses, but cannot fund the existing system indefinitely, which is kind of fair enough. Capstone, we've been talking about Capstone over the last couple of meetings, and they have now regained control of that spacecraft. That spacecraft was, as you might recall, launched on a Rocket Lab rocket, and it was put into its correct orbit perfectly by the Rocket Lab launch vehicle. However, it began to spin in September as a result of a course correction and a stuck thruster, open valve, causing issues in the deep space mission. Recovery plans were executed on October 7, and that seemed to have been successful. So regained its full 3-axis control, which is great. Capstone is now oriented with the solar rays to the sun, so at least it's getting power as well. Moving further ahead on the recovery plan before the CubeSat's expected arrival at the moon in November 13. So good luck, Capstone. And this, it's probably hard to see on there, but this is a schematic of the mission and the orbital placement of that vehicle around the moon. iSpace aims to launch a lunar lander next month. So Mission 1, M1, lunar lander, part of the Hakuto program, in a target window of 9 to the 15th of November. It's set to occur on a SpaceX rocket from Florida, and it will carry multiple commercial and government payloads, including 2 rovers to the surface of the moon. It was originally developed as part of the entry in the Google Lunar X Prize. People might remember that, called Hakuto, but did not progress to a flyable mission during the time period that the X Prize required. In August, iSpace announced the restructuring of its lunar program. They called it Hakuto R. So that's the location it's planned to land on, the Lucas Samorium, chosen over the other landing site for better conditions. And it'll carry multiple commercial and government payloads, including these 2 rovers, the Rashid rover from the Emirates lunar mission and a Japanese rover to the surface of the moon. So that's the United Arab Emirates rover. So it's a bit of a partnership on the ground station of the Communication European Space Agency Network, EastTrack, and the European Space Operations Centre in Darmstadt in Germany. It's all going to be involved at the New Norcia, Western Australia, and Cerberus, Spain, and Nagle, Argentina, and Goonie Hill, UK tracking stations. So launch alert, Falcon Heavy is going to go off at this stage on Tuesday, November the 1st, 44 minutes past midnight Melbourne time. So that's going to be the USSF 44 classified Space Force mission. And it'll go off from pad 39A and Tetra 1 and another unknown satellite. We don't know what that's all about, but those those Falcon Heavies are pretty spectacular to watch, especially with the double booster landing if it works. All right, on and on we go with this thing. Should have the Benny Hill music running. Yes, so there we go. So as we speak, the Artemis stack, including the SLS, it's been rolled back into the VAB. It was rolled back on the 27th September to hide away from Hurricane Ian, which actually didn't turn out to be as catastrophic as they predicted, but at least it was in a safe environment and they were able to protect the asset and the equipment. This is my editorial. There's no damage to Artemis or any of the facilities at Kennedy Space Centre. So they've conducted inspections and they're preparing to roll it back out to 39B. October 12, they replaced interim cryogenic propulsion upper stage batteries and powered up the NASA's, the Orion spacecraft battery charging to load flight software. So they're hoping to roll it back out to the launch pad, barring hurricanes, locusts, tempests, whatever else might come up, insurrections on November 4th. So good luck with that. Hope that goes well. And they have now set some some target dates for the next attempt. They've also charged up those CubeSats that have been sitting there for that long. I don't even know whether they were going to be flyable if it had gone off at the delayed launch attempt. Anyway, so now it's targeted for November the 14th. That's Melbourne time at 4:07 p.m. According to my calculations. A 69-minute launch window. And they've also requested backup opportunities on Wednesday the 16th at 5:04 and Saturday the 19th at 5:45. Both of those are 2-hour launch windows. It's probably a nicer bit of buffer. Anything with that is it's going to be a night launch in the States. And okay, it's great for us in Australia, but the imagery of being able to capture imagery of it ascending in at night is a bit questionable in my uneducated opinion. But anyway, I'm sure they know what they're doing. Well, do they know what they're doing? And the weather. Well, the weather would be better at night, wouldn't it? Yeah. No. Okay. It's better early in the morning over there, is it? Even in November? Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So if it gets off on the 14th November, they're targeting a little splashdown in the Pacific on the 9th of December. And this is just a bit of a graphic of the ascent profile and the different stages where everything gets dumped into the ocean and nothing really gets reused. Those beautiful engines that flew on the space shuttle so many times are going to be fish food, and all the boosters and everything else. Not even going to recover the solar rocket boosters like they did in the shuttle era. Anyway, I thought you might be interested. This when they were still back out of the pad, it was the only time they could actually connect into the high pressure liquid oxygen and hydrogen system. So that's where they had changed over some seals in the hope that they're going to try and mitigate those leaks. And that's a little enclosure that they built around where they're doing the work to do the work. They've done those. They reckon that they've identified some issues. But I thought you might be interested. I tried to run this last month from when I was in Newcastle, but it didn't work. I thought you might be interested in this. This is some footage. There we go. Some footage that was taken inside the VAB of the swing arms. So you can see how it happens. It pulls back and then lifts up out of the way of the ascending rocket. So that's where the issues have been with these leaks. So hopefully they get that all sorted. All right, that brings us back to this schedule that I've been sharing with you for the last few months. They've got it all scheduled out to June of 2023 on this current manifest. So the blue box indicates the current target for liftoff, and the green areas are where they can achieve their objectives, red areas where they can't, and grey areas are there's no opportunity at all. So read that as you wish. Now, once again, the profile for the Artemis 1 mission is to go out and orbit around the moon and do a few experiments and run a few things and then fly back, and their Orion capsule comes back into splashdown. So I believe it's a retrograde orbit, is that right? Yeah. All right, well, that's enough for me. Oh, Andrew's left the room, has he? Well, I've got a picture of Andrew in his younger days, so I thought that might be appropriate. So that's enough for me. Andrew, we're ready for you.
Well, one of the news that came up a little while ago now is that the InSight detected some asteroids or meteorites, small pieces of rock, hitting Mars. And this is the Nature paper that was publishing that. And hopefully, no, that one, yeah. InSight has a seismometer on the surface, and it detects a whole lot of things, including a bit of wind ruffle and hopefully some Mars quakes. But it also detected the air shockwave coming from the asteroid. I keep calling them asteroids, meteorites. Now, that's supposed to have sound. So sounds weird. Sorry, Peter. Ah, gotcha. Okay, thank you. Am I deaf or is it? Ah. Now you'll notice it sounded a bit weird, and we'll just play that once more. So it sounds like a bloop because of the way the sound travels through the Martian atmosphere. These are the 3 craters that were detected, the formation of these craters. They were photographed later on by the HiRISE instrument, which is on the Mars Reconnaissance Orbiter. And one of them located 85 kilometers from InSight, another one 91 kilometers, and another one a whopping 244 kilometers away down here. So these are the craters that it detected. So why is that important? Well, by looking at what's dug up, we find out what's below the ground, although we'll find out about below the surface of Mars a bit later in the show. So here's what happens. The meteoroid comes in there, does an airburst, later on, lower down, the second airburst and then the air impact. Now, here's I've got an enlargement of this coming up, but here's the velocity of sound at various altitudes. And you see it goes in quite an unusual way. So, and here's insight over here. And so the sound travels from the airbursts and also through the ground from the impacts. So coming in here, airburst, impact, and that particular one there's 85 kilometers from the InSight lander. Now here's the properties of sound in the atmosphere of Mars. The velocity in this way up to 250 meters per second at various altitudes. The wind blows on Mars at the time of the impact. And here is the effective sound velocity in meters per second after you correct for the wind velocity. There's a whole table of latitude, longitude, of diameters of craters, because they detected quite a few others as well. But those are the three main ones that they initially detected. They've been back through the data and found others as well. I'll skip that diagram. And then they've been able to compare the impacts on Mars with lunar impacts that were done artificially. By crashing objects into the moon. Okay, now, do you remember earlier this year that they launched a whole lot of Starlinks? Yeah, okay, they do that every few days. But these ones, a lot of them came crashing back down to Earth. Well, here's what happened. There was a big explosion on the sun and sent masses of material out. And guess what? It hit the Earth. So these pictures are from SOHO, the Solar and Heliospheric Observatory. And that's when the Starlinks were launched. And these storms caught the Starlink satellites a few days later. Again, we have graphs here of the magnetic field in nanoteslas. We have the velocity of the solar wind in kilometers per second, and a few other data points there back in February of this year. So what's that got to do with the Starlinks? Well, here is a picture of the North Pole with the energy being delivered by the solar wind into the Earth's atmosphere. This is in gigawatts against time, and these are the magnetic field, interplanetary magnetic field in nanoteslas. Now, again, we find these are maps of the magnetic field around the Earth at the time. And we watch this, we see how this graph develops over time. If you compare the graph with the auroral oval here, and we're going to get up to the time when the Starlinks were knocked out of orbit by the solar storm. You can see the magnetic field fluctuates in strength quite a lot. And now we see the energy starting to pump up. Drops precipitously and then builds again. And it's this peak in the energy delivered into the atmosphere that did in those Starlinks. All right. So here's how it varied over time on February the 3rd. And we're waiting for this peak here. This is a magnetic field reversal here. I mean, not the whole Earth, but just this area. And then we come up to the peak and, uh-oh, goodbye, Starlink. Okay, we'll move on. Now, you may have heard of a thing called Blue Walker 3. It's a communication satellite. It's been launched in September, but has yet to be unfolded. When it unfolds, it'll be this big. That's 64 square meters, which is about the size of a single squash court. It's at the moment, it's rolled up. The idea is that it will provide point-to-point communications using directed beam technology. So each of those little squares can direct to a particular place on Earth. Well, this appeared on the internet and purported to show the Starlinks that had been launched, and Blue Walker 3 was on a Starlink launch along with the Starlink satellites. And this is supposed to be the Blue Walker 3. Now hang on, if Blue Walker 3 was launched with these satellites, how come it's going in a different direction? Sorry. And you say, hang on, that thing that's supposed to be Blue Walker 3 is going in a different direction. How can that be when it went launched on the same thing? Well, given that this was put up on the internet a few days after the launch, and given that Blue Walker 3 has yet to unfold, this is obviously a fake. So don't believe everything you see on the internet. Okay? Horror, horror. Some people put fakes up on the internet. Yeah. So, and I don't know that these are was the actual launch. It could have been an earlier one, because this is quite a common thing you can find now on the internet. I've actually been out a few times to try and see this parade across the sky, and always gone unlucky. Either oh, yeah, yeah. Anyway, let's move on. Juno. Now, Juno is in an orbit around Jupiter, and has been for several years now. And the orbit keeps changing. Last year, or was it earlier this year? Probably earlier this year, I can't remember now. The orbit passed Ganymede. Well, a few days ago, the orbit was down here on this perijove. PJ is a perijove, which means the closest point to Jupiter. And it passed Europa. Soon, it will pass Io. So let's have a look at what happened a few days ago. There's a camera on board, which is not an official payload and is operated by amateurs. And we have, for the first time since the Galileo mission, some reasonably high resolution pictures of Europa. And these are taken by GenoCam, processed by amateurs, and then put up on the internet. Now, this is a comparison between what was taken by Galileo and taken by Junocam. As you can see, the Europeans love freeways and motorways, you know, high speed. Hmm?
It's on the internet, sure, it's not just a picture of a candle.
Yeah, I know what you mean. See, there's even overpasses and things like that. This is got the people talking. This feature here. It's obviously some welling up has happened, and brought material. Now, if I was asked where to land, I would land on somewhere like this or on one of these cracks where material apparently has come up. If I was going to go there and try and find out what's below, rather than drill through, you know, 10, 20, 50, 100 kilometers of ice before you get down to the water below, look at what's come up, been brought up, and look for the microbes and things that have been preserved in there. Anyway, those are those two pictures compared before. Okay. And you let people go to work on the imagery and they get artistic as well. So this is a real picture, but it's artificially colored, obviously. Okay. Now, let's have a look at Apollo. Yeah, Apollo. New stuff keeps coming up. Apollo 15 and 17 put heat probes into the surface of the moon. Some of the data was analyzed at the time, but a lot of the data wasn't. And then the data was lost. Well, they have come up with rescued the data and have done some new analysis of the heat flow. And the results are rather surprising. First of all, let's look at the probes. This is Apollo 15, 2 probes, and Apollo 17, again, 2 probes, and they measured at different depths. Now let's move on. So this is the archival status. The blue is data processed and archived by the original operations, and that only went up to the end of 1974. After that, they didn't bother. They said, we know what's happened here. Well, they rescued the data going up to as far as near the end of 1977. Now, so what's new? Well, when you plot the data, and this looks better if I was to enlarge it up, but I won't, you can see that the temperatures are going up. And they say, hey, what the heck's going on here? Well, have a look at where the probes were. Apollo 15, and you notice the astronauts have tramped around the probe quite a bit and stirred up the soil. Likewise, Apollo 17, again, they've stirred up the soil. There's a clue as to what might be causing the temperature rise. Let's have a look from orbit. These are LROC pictures. And here's the descent stage of the Apollo 15. And here's the Apollo Lunar Science Experiment package. And it's all stirred up around there compared to the rest. In other words, it's darker. And look here, likewise, around here, where the LSIP is, it's darker. So what happens when you shine light on a dark surface? Of course, it's going to heat up. So here's the plots of the things. The change in temperature is about 3.5 Kelvin or 3.5 Celsius, if you prefer. And you see the temperatures are increasing. Well, they've finally published a paper that says dark surfaces absorb heat eventually. Okay, so there's some more of the plots. And so the temperature is increasing at about 0.9 of a degree per year, or 0.9 Kelvin. Well, that's, so I'll go back. These are where the whereabouts on the probes, the temperatures are being measured. All right. And Peter, see here, these are at 1.3, 1.77 and 2.33 meters below the surface. So these different plots, the green is the deepest one. And the one that shows the biggest difference is the one that's the shallowest one at 1.3 meters. So, and that's what you'd expect, that the further down you go, the less effect you're going to have of the surface warming. Okay. So new data comes out from Apollo from 50 years ago. Now, here's one. This purple graph, which shows the extreme variations, is only 35 centimeters below the surface. The green one is the deepest one, but even that shows a slight increase over the period of time. Right. And notice the effect of an eclipse. That's an eclipse of the moon as seen from the Earth. Or an eclipse of the sun as seen from the moon. Okay, and let's skip that graph and let's go on now. Now, computers are wonderful things, and they've done new simulations on how the Earth might have formed. And it turns out that the Earth's, the moon would have formed in just a few days after that impact, rather than the months or years that had previously been thought. And we get two bodies formed, one of which crashes back into the Earth, and the other goes into orbit around the Earth. And it's the gravitational interaction between these two, that larger body and the smaller body, that kicks the smaller body into orbit. And it becomes stable. So there we have new ideas on how the moon was formed. A modification of an idea that's been around for quite a few years now. Now, talking of eclipses, there's going to be one on November the 8th. It'll be the last one for quite a few years. And guess what? We're going to see it at moonrise, and we will see the whole eclipse down here from when the partial eclipse starts happening. We'll miss the penumbral part, but we'll be able to see from here in Melbourne, weather permitting, the entire eclipse from then on. And it's had to be the last one for quite a few years, so don't miss it. November the 8th, it's just after moonrise, and we'll see it right through until the end. So take a look out for that one. Now, clips. I took this from a presentation that was done to some scientists, and these are the planned clips deliveries for the near future. And the one that Peter was mentioning, it should be in there somewhere. No, I can't see it. Anyway, so there's quite a few lunar landing missions coming up in the near future. Of course, they've got no people on board. Insight, I say, Ingenuity, the helicopter's flown 33 times now. And in a flight before the last one they did, Take a look up here. In a moment, it'll recycle. It's a gift. There it is. Look at that. Something hanging off the footpad. Looks like a piece of plastic or a piece of cloth. Where the hell did that come from? And then partly through the flight, it drops off. It's gone. I'll let you see it once more now. You know what you're looking for. Just near where the cursor is there. There it goes. Hanging in the breeze off the footpad. And then it's gone. All right. So the helicopter is keeping up with the Perseverance rover, several hundred meters away, but reasonably close, staying in radio contact. Now, this is a picture from the European Mars Express spacecraft, which has been in orbit now for about, 10, 20 years, something like that, a long time. And here is a picture of Deimos, the moon of Mars. And this is Europa, Ganymede, Jupiter, Io, and Callisto. Wow. Now, it took 80 images on February the 14th of 2022. Sorry about the misspelling there. And here it is. Here's the movie. Isn't that wonderful? Here we are at Mars, looking past Deimos at Jupiter, which is hundreds of millions of kilometers in the distance. What a wonderful camera that the Mars Express has. Now, another one happened as well. This happened on March the 30th of this year. Took 19 images of Phobos, which at that time was about 12,000 kilometers away, and Deimos, which at that time was nearly 28,000 kilometers away. So let's have a look at what that looked like. Bingo. Okay. Now, probing Mars and seeing what's below the surface. Mars has got a signal that can actually penetrate into the soil or regolith of Mars, depending on how moist it is. And this paper came up in Nature Communications on September. And we have here the data where it's taken. This is a molar image, but the MARSIS instrument on Mars Express plotted along these tracks and was able to penetrate below the surface. It had previously been reported that maybe the reflections it was getting were clay. Now here's the probing below this. This is depth below the surface, and that's the surface across the south polar region of Mars. And there was these reflections which were suggestive of, initially they thought water, and then they thought, no, it's maybe a smectite type clay. Now, again, they're thinking it's water. We get multiple reflections at different frequencies, suggesting, and that's interpreted as water. I won't do the interpretation for you now because we're running out of time. The Indians have had a spacecraft in orbit around Mars for several years now, and the results from that are coming through thick and fast, and I'm going to run through a few here. This is the diurnal, that is daily variations in the aphelion cloud as observed by the Emirates Exploration Imager, which is one of the instruments on the Emirates spacecraft. Here we get the diurnal variations and zonal mean ice clouds. So at different times of the day, we find that the ice clouds in the atmosphere of Mars are varying. These are the peak clouds, and this is spring, summer. This is the peak cloudy season. And this is after a regional dust storm is starting to die down. So you can see the dust storm has a massive effect on the ice clouds in the Martian atmosphere. Dust storms have been observed by the Indian mission, the Emirates mission. And here we've got a dust cloud here. And that's in color, and this is a monochrome picture taken on September the 10th of last year. Now, let's see an animation of that. Oh no, sorry, the next one's an animation. These are different times of, I should have made those scripts bigger, but they give you the times as that storm, here it is here, moves across the thing. Of course, the spacecraft itself is moving, and so it moves towards the horizon because of the motion of the spacecraft. Now, there it is. So the Emirates spacecraft doesn't get much attention, but I did warn you that you might see something that had escaped your attention before. Now, also from the Emirates mission, the first synoptic images of the far ultraviolet discrete aurora has been seen. And there we have the aurora at various times. And you can see it changes quite a lot over the period of time that's shown here. This is the geographic occurrence rate of discrete aurorae. You can see there's a latitude difference in where the aurorae occur. Now remember, Mars has not got a defined magnetic field the way that we do here on Earth. The Martian magnetic field is quite localized. And so the aurorae can happen over the whole planet. So this is the night side of Mars, and we've got the pixels at various wavelengths and at various radiation levels, nanometers. And comparing with the aurora and known aurora. Okay, let's move on. And hydrogen and oxygen emissions has been detected. And the idea is that spacecraft's in orbit around Mars, and it looks at the atmosphere, the sunlight reflecting off the atmosphere, and you get the spectrum. And this is the observed average spectrum. And the color indicates the log of the spectral radiance at a perceptual scale, and that is how you perceive it. So they're analyzing the spectra from the Emirates mission. They've also done some atmospheric studies of the various seasons, and you can see the seasons changing here over a period of time. This is dust columns, measurements, atmospheric temperature, water ice. Okay. And there's the dust column changing over periods of time. So all this from the Emirates mission. Carbon monoxide has been measured as well. And there are some of the measurements of the carbon monoxide in the Martian atmosphere. Argon has been detected in ultraviolet. And here are some of the ultraviolet argon maps of the Martian atmosphere. And this is the orbital path of the Emirates Mars mission. Day glow has been measured. And again, we got some day glow maps from the Mars mission. You can see day glow varies quite a bit a period of time. These are different dates and different times. Ice clouds are detected floating in the atmosphere. And proton aurorae have been seen. Time doesn't allow me to go into these in much detail. So we'll skip through these. There's some of the with no aurorae and with lots of aurorae going on. NASA issued this results based on the MAVEN results and on the Emirates mission. Combining the two lots of data, they can work out where the aurorae are going to be formed and how they're formed. Now, quickly to Mars, still on Mars, Zhurong, the Chinese rover. This is the path it's been along. It has a ground penetrating radar, and here's a plot down below the surface. And from that, you tell there's a layer of regolith. And then 20 meters, there's a finely divided rock. And then down even deeper, down to 50 meters, there's larger rocks. And then we get down below here, the basal layer. As a result, the Chinese scientists have written in their paper that they agree that there's been a catastrophic flood, deposited material, that there is a smaller flood later on that deposited material up, and then current conditions it's eroding it away slowly. And they suspect there might be, but they had no evidence for it, that there might be brines deep down surviving. But there's no, they don't have any evidence that that is actually the case. They're just saying it could be there. So here's some more of the data from the Chinese Zhurong. All right. And they've been able to compare a Zhurong's data with the Phoenix data from the Phoenix lander. All right. Now, Tianwen-1.
火卫一的影像是由环绕器上有效载荷高分相机的小面阵探测器获取的。这次的拍摄是环绕器在已经完成了对火星全球中分辨率遥感影像获取的既定科学目标任务基础上，实施了一次重要的扩展任务。这次利用环绕器高分相机拍摄火卫一，验证了利用环绕器自身的控制能力，在满足光照、通讯、能源的约束条件下，实施计划外科学观。
Okay, we'll skip. So China has been photographing Phobos as well. Now, Solar Orbiter, the European Space Agency mission, has solved the mysteries of the switchbacks. And now to DART. Angelo, this is for you, especially for you.
L'ICECube ce l'ha fatta. Il nanosatellite di ASI ha superato con successo la sua grande sfida nello spazio profondo: immortalare a 12 milioni di chilometri dalla Terra il primo impatto di una sonda contro un asteroide. Il team di l'ICECube, piccolo gioiello tecnologico realizzato da Argotec, ha rilasciato oggi le prime immagini che testimoniano la storica collisione tra la sonda DART di NASA e l'asteroide Dimorphos, nel primo test di difesa planetaria. L'impatto di DART è avvenuto questa notte quando in Italia erano l'1:14. La sua azione autodistruttiva è stata mostrata quasi in diretta dalla camera Draco a bordo di DART, un film che non ha però ripreso l'impatto vero e proprio contro Dimorphos, comprese le sue conseguenze sulla superficie dell'asteroide. Ed è qui che subentra il grande valore di l'ICECube, la prima missione completamente italiana nello spazio profondo, il cui coordinamento scientifico è affidato a INAF. Le immagini scattate dalle sue due camere Leia e Luke testimoniano infatti l'impatto di DART, mostrando il cono di detriti espulsi dalla superficie di Dimorphos, che nell'immagine è visibile in alto a destra rispetto all'asteroide maggiore di Dimos.
Questo praticamente è un filmino creato mettendo in rapida successione, una dopo l'altra, un'immagine.
Well, I have to skip on because time's out, but these are some of the pictures now from the LICECube spacecraft. You've probably all seen the DART ones, but these are the ones from LICECube of the impact. So it was quite a spectacular smash. Yeah, coming to that. And okay, now that's from DART. From DART and DART again. And this is from the ground, from Goldstone. And we've got where Dimorphos, that's Didymos, and this is Dimorphos here and here. And this is where it was expected to be, and as against where it actually was after the impact. Those are the dates are shown there as well. I get the idea. Okay, now moving on, because yep, finishing in a few seconds, I hope. That's from the Hubble Space Telescope. And notice there's an ion tail and a dust trail, just like a comet. The orbit changed. And here's the data. Turns out that the period has been changed by 32 minutes. 32 minutes. They expected, if we saw 2 or 3 minutes, would be great. 32 minutes change in the orbital period. Okay. Another thing has come up now with the International Mars Ice Mapper mission. The final report has been planned for a launch. If they approve it, it'll go for launch in 2026. It's going to have a huge radar antenna, much like the Indian NASA NISA mission, which is going to be launched next year. There's the antenna, huge thing. Now, and ladies and gentlemen, I rest my case. I must thank Michael Abdullah for first drawing my attention to that.
All right, thanks, Andrew. That was excellent as always. And thank you, Glen, if you're still online. We much appreciate you attending tonight, and it was great. We'll have to have you back again, especially after Artemis does whatever it does. Gets in orbit, does something else sideways. I don't know. Anyway, it's going to be fascinating. That's it for tonight, everyone. Thank you for coming along. And for all those people online, we've had about 16 or 20 or so online tonight. So next month, the 20th of November, at this stage, we've got lined up someone from Sabre Astronautics, and they're going to be talking about their Australian astronaut program. No, not astrology, not astronomy, astronaut program. So come along next month, and there might be a ticket under your seat and you can go to space. No, that's not quite true, but it's fascinating. It's a real thing, and they're working with a partnership with an American group, and fascinating. And Sabre Astronautics in their own right do some amazing stuff. They've got space control centers in Adelaide and also in the US. So they're kicking goals big time. And Jason Held is the CEO of that. That's it, everyone. Thank you for tonight. I don't think we've got time for you, Ashley, to do your thing, but maybe Ashley just came back from the States and got inside SpaceX. More about that next month. Thanks, everyone.